Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. This is Warren from the SEO podcast, and I'm joined today by Zach Mifsud, who is going to join me in quite a different topic than what we typically discuss. We're going to go through the DOJ Antitrust lawsuit essentially against Google in the US, which is a big deal. We've seen similar cases in Europe, and we've also had other cases in the US against other companies, but this is quite a big one. And today we want to cover a bit the legal implications of that. What does it mean for Google? What does it mean for people working in SEO? And my guest today will be covering the legal aspect. I'll be covering the SEO aspect. And Zach, I'll leave you to do a bit of an introduction about yourself, that the audience who you are, what you're doing, and then we can get started.
Sure thing. First, thank you for having me on your podcast in this gloomy day, and also a gloomy day for Google, it seems, given the fact that they will be dragged into the US Virginia courts today, I believe. Just to give you a bit of a basic background as to who I am. So I'm Zach Mifsud. I'm a warranted Maltese lawyer. I've been working in the online gambling industry since 2015, particularly in September. I started off working in a B2C part of the industry. So obviously I was exposed to pretty much most things marketing, right? You and I have that. We coincidentally, that's where we met.
Yes.
So with that background in marketing, I took a keen interest when it comes to SEO. Besides obviously gambling legislation. And with the latest turn of events, at least for Google, it seems that the SEO sphere might be changing slightly. Hopefully today we get to discuss, the effects of the DOJ verdict and discuss, what implications that would have on SEO professionals.
Indeed. Let's start with that, Zach. For those of us who are maybe not too familiar with the legal aspect of it, what is a DOJ antitrust case? What does it essentially
So,
entail?
in essence, so let's start off by who is the DOJ. So the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is a U.S. entity, and it is currently pretty much addressing, the fact that there are major concerns at the moment in relation to big tech, particularly on their concentration of power. Right? You have the likes of Google, you have the likes of Facebook, so Meta, so to speak, so on and so forth. So it seems that there have been major concerns when it comes to the concentration of power, not just for the consumers, but also for competitors and professionals alike. So, Google happens to be, I would say, the example they're trying to make over here. The DOJ pretty much follows suit as to what happened in the EU. So this is nothing new for Google. And so they have been dragged into the mud in the EU. So obviously now it's the US's turn to drag them into the mud. Ultimately, Google is a behemoth, just like Meta is. So obviously it's actually quite a fight, but all parties are putting on over here. So that's why it's very interesting for us to see government taking on a behemoth that could, quite frankly, really affect, disrupt markets as we're seeing at the moment. We can delve into the merits of the case when it comes to the DOJ and Google. So as it currently stands, as I said, I think it's really important here to focus on the fact that the DOJ is trying to make an example over here as to what it could do, how it could influence big tech. That is very important to keep in mind. However, come again?
And I guess this is coming from their search dominance, right? Predominantly, but also their dominance in other areas.
So no, definitely. So obviously, if one had to look at the key arguments presented by the DOJ, we're looking at 4 key arguments over here. The fact that Google had exclusionary contracts, the fact that Google had market control, the fact that there was consumer harm, and ultimately there was innovation stifling. With those bundles together, right, there was a serious case that the DOJ could make before the US court. Now, with that being said, for there to be a proper, successful antitrust case, at least in the US, there are many factors that have to be taken into consideration. More often than not, antitrust cases fall because, these 4 criteria, so exclusivity, market control, that means dominance, consumer harm, and the stifling of innovation is very difficult to prove together right? There's a lot of prima facie evidence has to be collected and put together. Google seems to have ticked all of the boxes here in the
I
sense.
mean, if we look at SEO, right, it's we only optimize for Google. It
Pretty,
has well over 90% market share, at least in the Western world. So
it's not just in the Western world, right? Because when you think about it, the way in which it controls the market and at least it exercises its exclusivity is by obviously targeting other big tech companies. So when you factor in, so let's break down the key arguments, right? So you have
mhm,
exclusionary contracts. So from what it seems, Google has exclusive contracts with the likes of other big tech firms such as Apple or Samsung, where Google is paying billions of dollars in the form of, listen, I'll give you money, I'll throw money at you, but you need
yeah,
to give me exclusivity,
yes,
right?
indeed,
And let's face it, most professionals work on platforms created by Microsoft,
yes,
Samsung, Apple, you name it. So with that, you're pretty much excluding, that 10% left in the market of potential SEO platforms to exercise their control within these big tech firms. So obviously, then that ties in with market control because if, for example, you're entering into exclusive agreements, automatically you've pretty much taken control of the market.
you've got an audience immediately. And particularly, I mean, Google have Android themselves. So by default, the search engine is going to be Google. And they do have that agreement with Apple, which, I mean, iPhones are in a lot of people's hands, and the default search engine there is Google. And just to draw a bit of a parallel there, because you mentioned the EU as well, and Google has already kind of been scrutinized under there. Now in Europe, you have to choose your browser. So it's a pop-up, sorry, your search engine. It's a pop-up that comes up when you open your browser, and it exposes consumers to a more competitive nature where they can choose which search engine is going to serve them. Is it something similar that we might see from the US?
Well, most definitely. So as it currently stands, we're at a point where although the ruling court has blatantly said that there is an element, a prima facie element of monopolization, which means there's a guilty verdict.
Mhm.
However, as it currently stands, Google will definitely be appealing this judgment, which will prolong ultimately any form of remedial
Absolutely.
action. So I would argue that we might see. So let's say there's an appeal and Google loses that appeal. Any changes that would come would probably be in around 2 to 3 years. So looking at 2027, 2028.
Okay.
But as I said, there are many different things that the court could impose upon Google over here. In the past antitrust cases, so I think we should make reference here to two very relevant antitrust cases with Microsoft and AT&T. If I'm not mistaken, AT&T was in the late 80s, Microsoft late 90s. We did experience, at least with Microsoft, very similar anti-competitive behavior where Microsoft would pre-load Internet Explorer, and we all know how bad that was,
Absolutely.
the pains of working on that.
As the
And
best browser in the world.
exactly. So obviously that was brought before the courts. There was a full antitrust case, but the court, at least with Microsoft, was very close to breaking Microsoft apart.
Okay.
And with a breakup, obviously comes many consequences, especially for companies like Microsoft, like Google, upon which many third parties rely on. So as you know, let's curb Microsoft to the side. Let's focus on Google. We have so many businesses at the moment that have scaled their business on Google.
Yeah.
Possible breakup of Google, and when I say breakup, it doesn't necessarily mean just having an office dividing it into two. But so one of the some of the key things that the U.S. court was pushing on in its the DOJ was pushing on in its argumentation was that the fact that Google had a search engine that had market share
Yeah.
and the search advertising that had market share proved to be
Yeah.
a great naked restraint to business. So
Okay.
obviously, you had Google leveraging its search engine to improve, to continue dominating its search advertising.
Mm.
So that could be a possible breakup. So you could break up Google in such a way. So that would be separate.
That would be huge because
It would
that's
be
where Google is getting a big chunk of their revenue. And essentially, that is, I mean, as people working in SEO, we think organic search, it's there to serve the purpose of ads, ultimately.
no, certainly, and we've seen that Google have been leveraging on this. Most conglomerates do this, so they have a very good product, another good
Mhm.
product. Let's leverage each product off to multiply out. It's a multiplier effect at the end of the day.
Yeah,
It's a very capitalist thing.
absolutely.
However, courts could go down that avenue and obviously break Google up in such a way. They did so to AT&T, so AT&T in the past did go through that breakup. But let's face it, look at where that brought AT&T. I mean, from a global perspective, is very relevant nowadays.
Yes, yes.
So if Google really want to put up a fight, it is not for it to be broken up. So fragmentation, although it boosts the competition's possibility to penetrate the SEO marketplace, at the end of the day, Google will be putting up a fight.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, though, I highly doubt that any such breakup would take place. And let's park the good things about breaking up a business, and let's focus on the bad stuff. And that is, at the end of the day, the fact that Google is a one-stop shop.
Yes.
Meaning, if I am a business, I can go to Google and I can set pretty much everything from Google, be it the search advertising, the search engine, the platform, Google Analytics, AdSense, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So for me, as somebody, so I'll actually speak about myself. So somebody who has pretty much no technical knowledge when it comes to this stuff, I would want to obviously outsource such a thing. Hi Google, I like the fact that you have bundles, and I can benefit at the end of the day from the bundles that you're offering, because although the bundles are expensive, if you had to put them all together, the global cost would always mean less, would always be less if I had to go in into separate bundles. So
Mhm.
with that being said, there's that thing as well. Obviously, by fragmenting Google, you're also disrupting the market, because
Yeah.
businesses, at least on smaller businesses, would have to seek then professional advice, could be from a lawyer, but even from a technical perspective, as to how to break up their business structures. Because as I said, businesses are modeled on the Google. If I'm not mistaken, they're modeled on Google's Eat. I forgot the acronym, but
It's one of their
one of their
criteria essentially.
exactly. So
It's
obviously, if there's going to be any form of breakup from Google, it should be very important that businesses adopt the same strategy going forward as Google used to impose upon them with the guidelines and whatnot. Why I think listen, at the end of the day, Google is a golden standard in the industry. Um, market dominance or not, it is what it is. They are the golden standard, and they have been doing an excellent job in that. However, like going back to the whole argument of breaking up their business, I strongly believe that the courts would actually impose behavior remedies, and this is exactly what happened in the EU. So as you mentioned before, there have been three cases in the EU. They started off in 2017 with the Google Shopping case, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken. Then we had the Android case, and then we had the AdSense case in 2019. Go forward to 2020, the US slaps the DOJ
indeed.
slaps Google with
Yes,
a
yes.
with a court case in the US.
But you mentioned something interesting as well when it comes to Google being the golden standard. I mean, they have been so far, and the connected services that they have, what obviously they're going to make it a bigger barrier for competition to go in to offer that same level of service. But if you argue about it from a consumer point of view, it also makes life easier. So, for example, in Europe recently, what I noticed when you search for a particular location, the Google Map image shows up, but you cannot click through to the Google Maps app, so to speak, which as a user, I find very frustrating. So it's opening up, yes, room for competition, but at the same time, it's making my use as a consumer even more frustrating than it was before.
And I completely agree with you. I mean, I'm not as tech savvy as I want to be, so I'm very much reliant on the services provided to me by Google. I use pretty much everything, starting from Gmail, Google, Google Maps. You walk into your car, there's Google Maps, right? You walk
Yes,
into
yes,
your car, Android phone pops up on the screen. You can start playing your music, so on and so forth. So by fragmenting that business, at least from a search advertising point of view, I mean you're only going to make it slightly more difficult for the consumer. However, I think it's important to focus on the benefits derived for SEO professionals, and that's pretty much potential market openings for competitors, which reduces the dominance, right? So as an SEO professional, there is a certain reliance on Google, which
absolutely.
ultimately it stifles innovation a bit. So that means you're a one-trick pony, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
So with innovation coming into play from competitors, as an SEO professional, you can always start experimenting with new products that will improve search advertising, um, uh, so on and so forth. And ultimately, having more players in the market creates more diverse SEO strategies as well,
it's
right?
true.
Because as it currently stands, if we're all following the same guidelines, we're really not offering something special, right? So we're
Yeah,
just it's just like being a lawyer, right? There are many lawyers. The competition at the end of the day, given the fact that there are many lawyers, is it could be high, but innovation is low.
yeah. I mean, we're completely at Google's mercy at this point. All we're always depending on what changes they do to their algorithm, and in certain cases, particularly recently, because this also comes at a very interesting time. So search quality, if you look at what most SEOs say, and even consumers, search quality has been dwindling for quite some time. So there was a particular formula that people were following, which is essentially write really long pages, over optimize them, and then you have that potential to go on top. So the example that we typically give is when you're searching for a recipe. When you're searching for a recipe, the recipe is at the very bottom of the page. Before that is a whole history of
Oh,
where
yeah.
spaghetti carbonara came from and which chef created it, so on and so forth. And as a result of that, search quality really diminished. At the same time, Google is facing increased competition from the likes of ChatGPT and SearchGPT coming out soon. At the same time, they're also facing this issue with the antitrust lawsuit. So it's really a hectic time for Google. And what we've seen recently, since roughly the September update from Google last year, they have been even more tight-lipped about what sort of updates they're putting out, and to notice any patterns with any search engine change has become increasingly harder with Google. And I wonder, would this antitrust even open up the possibility for Google to be more transparent about
So
their
most
search
most
algorithm?
definitely, right? Because that is exactly what the EU wanted. And Google did become
Mm,
more transparent in that regard. Obviously, transparency, at least. So let's focus on transparency into two different segments. So you have transparency with SEO professionals and transparency with consumers, and ultimately transparency with competitors. So from a competitor point of view, there could be transparency. So let's say Google is a dominant player in the market, and a small time company with the same tech as Google joins the club. So what Google can do to be more transparent is perhaps share its algorithms, which ultimately, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a prime asset, right? The algorithm is a prime
yeah,
asset. However, Google could license that out. It's an asset at the end of the day. It's licensable.
mm,
Make it seem like a very lucrative product package. License it out. Help small businesses scale, and like that, you're basically providing a helping hand to your competitor. Because
okay,
at the end of the so we've seen this in the past, where rival companies of different market shares help each other out to create a better product. Why? Because their market share is only going to increase. If Google's was 90, it's going to be 91 tomorrow. If DuckDuckGo's market share, for example, is 30%, it's going to go up to 40%. So it's a win-win situation. Google is going to look as transparent as possible. It's helping out. It wants other businesses to prosper with it. So obviously that's promoting competition, right?
Yeah,
With that being said, from an SEO perspective, if I'm a professional and I say, okay, so Google is going to provide its algorithms, its guidelines over to DuckDuckGo, to Bing, whatever. Like, okay, let me try their product,
yeah.
right? Let me see how their product can help facilitate my needs, and
Because then
ultimately,
obviously they would adapt that algorithm
exactly,
particular to their cases. So it won't be exactly like what is Google's offer.
exactly. So and ultimately, then from a consumer point of view, the transparency would pretty much come from, listen, um, so I have an Android phone that is ultimately a Google phone, right? And it's giving me the opportunity of using different search engines. So there's a choice screen, which
Mhm.
we've seen on both Android and on Apple, where through that choice screen, Google is informing me of which search engines me as a consumer can use. Because
Mhm.
as it currently stands, I mean, I'm certain that people born post 2010 only know that Google exists.
Most people do, yes.
So nobody
Most
know.
people
I
do.
mean, a few number of people probably remember. Bing exists, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, and the others. So by presenting that, I mean, nowadays, if you're born in 2010, you're what, 14? Yeah, you're 14 years old. I'm pretty sure you have access to a phone. So
Absolutely.
by presenting that, you're automatically giving the consumer the power to choose which search engine he or she wants to use. I mean, listen, to a certain extent, I'm certain that most consumers will be using Google as their default search engine,
That's the
but,
thing,
but the
yes.
option is over there.
Yeah.
However, when it then comes to SEO professionals, the idea of having multiple opportunities, ultimately as you said, there's less dependence on a single platform, which in essence mitigates their risk and adopts a new strategy to focus on multi-channel marketing.
Absolutely. And we've seen this, I mean, in Europe, Google's market share hasn't really gone down, regardless of this
It wouldn't
choice.
go down in the US either. As I said, it's a
Because
gold standard.
people are also creatures of habit in a way. So if you're used to a certain search result within Google, and despite them offering the choice, in most cases, Google is still the best localized version of a search engine. So with certain search engines, results tend to be fairly generic and not tailored to you, because that's also a big asset that Google has, is the data on its users. So it's going to custom tailor every single search based on your preferences to a certain extent, the
Certainly.
way that you're interacting with websites, your past history in Google Maps. And if we go back to breaking up areas of business, that's going to have a significant impact on the quality of search as well. Because if you're searching for, I don't know, restaurants near me, Google is checking your location. It has access to so many businesses because all businesses are on Google Maps. They're not on Bing Maps, for all I know. They're not on Apple Maps because Google is the platform to be in. So from a consumer standpoint, I also question at least current users, millennials probably and above, will keep using Google to a certain extent, but it's the upcoming generation who will have more of a choice. And we've discussed this in previous podcasts here. Um, People searching, for example, for travel tips on TikTok, people going directly to shopping websites rather than searching for that product on Google. So we're already seeing, you know, newer generations slightly shift away from Google. And a lot of those Google updates as well are in response to such changes in user behavior. So it's quite interesting though to see when you look at statistics with regards to Google's market share, it really hasn't dipped. So a question I would put to you: are these efforts that are taken by European court, by the DOJ, enough to promote this competition? Is there enough incentive for other search engines unless they are innovative, like what ChatGPT and SearchGPT will do to push for this market.
So, I mean, obviously, with the whole idea of having, generative AI, ChatGPT, SearchGPT, obviously that's a different discussion in itself. It has its own different legal implications. However, we cannot deny the fact that this is going to be providing that competitive edge against Google. However, my only concern is that Google will come in and sweep the market by through acquisition. At least, I mean, listen, I'm at least in the EU and the US, certain companies have to, as big as Google, have to go through regulatory approval before acquiring
Yeah.
certain competitors. However, what would be stopping, Google from acquiring its competition, thus increasing its market dominance? And that is something that obviously it would worry me from a anti-competition perspective. However, with the advent of TikTok providing its own search services, people flocking towards these platforms to search,
Mhm.
it will definitely provide that competitive edge to Google. However, it all boils down to how Google then finds back. It could be through acquisition, through opening it. I mean, it has enough money, it has enough capital to
Yeah.
target these platforms, create its own thing, even though I would say the market is pretty much saturated. However, from an incentive point of view, governments should be affording at least tax reliefs to
Mhm.
small time companies that want to penetrate the market and really stick it to Google, so to speak,
Yeah.
and provide consumers an alternate product than what Google has to offer and what TikTok has to offer at the end of. I mean, listen, let's do forget the size that TikTok has in the market, right?
Absolutely.
It's I wouldn't say it's a behemoth yet, but it's definitely up
But the
there.
growth has been
The
huge.
growth, I mean, the growth has been insane. If you had
Yes.
if,
Yes.
if you had to compare, to what it was like a couple of years ago, we're talking about years here.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's been just straight.
The adoption rate for TikTok is unparalleled at this point.
Exactly, and obviously, I'm pretty sure that Google analysts do have their eyes on the likes of TikTok and other social media platforms that are the hype at the moment.
Mhm.
Um, however, as I said, if lest we forget that the term Google has been included in the Oxford Dictionary. It's that popular,
Yes.
right? I Google something, that verb in itself is included in the most popular dictionary on the planet. So it goes to show the brand recognition that
Mhm.
Google has, and ultimately the fact that we use Google in our day-to-day lives. The embedding of Google in our lives has always been intentional. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of any conspiracy theory.
Yes.
However, we're here nowadays because all of this was intentional. So it's very evident that Google knew about its antitrust behavior, its anti-competitive behavior in the EU,
Mhm.
and look at where we are nowadays.
If we look at the timeline, so you mentioned it will take a few years. In the meantime, can Google still kind of run however it wishes? Because, for example, one thing we see recently, and again, we mentioned it in a few podcasts already. Recently, Google struck a deal with Reddit. So Reddit search results are kind of exclusive right now to Google. And Reddit, while probably not a behemoth to the scale of Google, when it comes to communities and forums, it's the leading platform. So we're still seeing Google do this behavior. And so in 3 years, they're gonna probably, if they're not forced to stop it in a way, it's probably gonna keep growing.
So unfortunately, the process in the US is very bureaucratic. So and we're I mean Google will definitely appeal this case unless they haven't declared this already in the media. With an appeal, obviously comes the appellate stage, which that takes time in itself. Then there's a compliance stage once the appeals court. So let's say the appeals court confirms the Supreme Court's first judgment. Then they come up with the remedies. Those remedies have to be then transposed into the business model, so on and so forth. However, there's media backlash. At the end of the day, Google is a listed company.
Mm-hmm.
Listed companies are driven by pretty much by consumer, right?
Yeah.
So
Shareholder value.
there's that shareholder value. So if there's a dip in their consumers, they will definitely take a hit then on the stock market. And at the end of the day, a stock market in the green is what drives Google, right? If it's in the red,
Absolutely.
it's going to listen to its consumers. So if
Absolutely.
it listens to its consumers, it listens to those professionals that make use of their services and the business that also make use of their services, or those businesses that have built their business around Google's ecosystem. Obviously, then they would have to budge, like it or not. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, this is just an antitrust case. The last thing they
Mhm.
want on their plate is a consumer case,
Mhm.
because obviously that is when things get very serious. Because
Consumer case, what would that be?
so one of the key arguments that DOJ presented to the court was the fact that there have been consumer complaints and complaints from
Okay.
competitors. More often than not, these consumer complaints came in the form of, "Listen, I'm stuck using Google. I cannot use anything else. Please help."
Mhm.
However, that could easily become then something that's taken up to any consumer rights authority,
Mhm.
and that is when things would have to be then pretty much enforced ASAP. Because
Okay.
at the end of the day, there's no greater right than that held by a consumer.
I understand.
So
Okay.
they would be forced to adapt as fast as possible. Um, however, these things are very complicated. As I said, the whole idea over here is that everyone is trying to tread very carefully, because any sudden change might disrupt businesses on a larger scale.
Mhm.
So I would say that any change would always happen progressively. It won't be instantaneous, because
Okay.
markets cannot afford to be disrupted in such a way. I mean, had this been, the automotive industry, where, it's just normal consumers using that product, and not businesses, for example, that's different, because a change could happen instantaneously. But something where there's a whole ecosystem around it, right?
It will take time.
It will take a lot and a lot of time, especially when big businesses are taking their product online nowadays, right? I mean,
Mhm.
the online ecosystem is gargantuan. So even
Absolutely.
there could be a snowball effect over here. Yeah,
I mean, if we look at what we're doing in SEO, if it had to be an overnight change where suddenly Google lost a significant chunk of its market share, to keep up with that would be insane. It would ruin so many businesses who are not ready to cater for other search engines. So I guess one way to prepare for such an eventuality, if you're working in SEO, and I mean even without the antitrust case, with the amount of competition that Google is potentially facing right now, is to also diversify the skill set, diversify the reliance on Google. Because despite them having a 90% market share at this point, there are other areas where consumers are active in, be it social media, be it shopping platforms like Amazon. All of these, in their own right, we can consider them to a certain extent search engines. And being prepared and increasing your knowledge in how other engines are working, how other platforms are working, can also limit the disruption if it comes to a point where Google has to split its
that's
businesses essentially.
I agree with you, but there are many small businesses that require a lot of capital to adapt to such change, even if it's gradual.
Mm,
Especially if, so as I gave an example before with myself, so I would definitely operate my business using their model
mhm.
and their products, right? So if there's a change to that particular product, and I have no idea what's out there, right? And I have no idea how to adapt my business to to another company's technology. I've had it, right? Because I
Mm.
would have to spend so much money to make that switch, to migrate
Yes,
whatever product I'm using over to this new product, learn that new product, or have people learn that new product. It's going to cost,
absolutely.
at the end of this, it's going to be very time consuming and very costly, especially when we live in a digital era. But I strongly believe that regulators should step in over here, right? Because regulators should be protecting competition, it should be protecting consumers, but ultimately it should be protecting SEO professionals.
Mm.
Let's focus on supporting the competition, because if you support the competition as a regulator, that competition is going to grow, and when that competition grows, innovation grows. So
Yes.
we could have regulators mandating data portability or interoperability, for example,
Okay.
right? Where we could have the competition being able to communicate with Google's systems, and there could be the interoperability between platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Regulators should be enforcing non-exclusive contracts, right? You get rid of that non-exclusive contract, you throw it into the bin, you've opened up the choice for the likes of Apple or Samsung to make use of Google's competitor's product.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself would pretty much entice consumers to use that product. Okay, Apple has opened up its doors to this competitor. That is a testament to the fact that Apple believes in that product.
Yes.
I trust what Apple has to say, so I would use that product. If it's approved by Apple, I will use it.
Mm-hmm.
Same reason why most iPhone users don't use Safari, but use Google, because Apple supports Google.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ultimately, as I said before, there's financial support and innovation grants. Tech nowadays costs money. Data costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So, to be able to host that data, to be able to gather that data, there's a lot of money involved. Provide grants to smaller businesses, tax incentives. Look, I'm pretty sure Google has benefited from some tax relief in the past, right? Just
Absolutely.
like Meta
Yeah.
have. So
Yes. Yes.
if we're willing to support the behemoth that has not only proven to be a bit of a naughty boy when it comes to anti-competitive behavior and abuse of data to a certain extent, lest we forget that has happened in the past. Why not
Mm-hmm.
support the smaller players in the industry? Ultimately, you support the local players in the industry. They grow up to a certain extent that you can start then imposing higher taxes upon them. That's more revenue for local
Mm-hmm.
regulators and governments alike. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, strengthen consumer choice screens.
Yes.
Even though for you and I, our golden standard would be Google. You mentioned the new generation. They are the future, obviously. So obviously, they given that choice, they would be able to help other businesses grow. So I
Mm-hmm.
would focus. So I would focus pretty much on, listen, we need more regulatory oversight, and that is exactly what the EU did. So as opposed to ripping apart a business, breaking it down like the US has done in the past with AT&T and with the near breakup of Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
On the other end of the spectrum, the EU imposed behavioral remedies,
Yes.
right? One of them is regulatory oversight. It may sound bureaucratic, but at the end of the day, it works, right? So with AdSense, so in the AdSense case, the remedial behavior, so the behavior remedy was, let's get rid of the exclusivity in your contracts.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
With the shopping case, it was like broadening different, widening the scope of how a consumer compares products by not just allowing Google to compare them, but opening it up to other comparison websites.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, it's all about changing the internal structures, the enacting new policies, new guidelines on an internal perspective to be able to then provide a better product to consumers and to compete then with smaller scale businesses.
Yes, and it opened up the market in the EU. The example that's coming to mind is even with another behemoth, Apple. So Apple, it had exclusivity of the App Store, and now in the EU, people can install third-party application stores where Apple is not necessarily going to get the same cut of revenue from every transaction that happens on that store, but at the same time, there are alternatives for people. And it's been dragged along for such a long time. Apple was saying, this is risky to the security of the phone. they still have a certain degree of approval for which app stores can be launched on an iPhone. And it's not an easy process to do. I've tried it myself. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a complicated process, but you have 2 or 3 steps, and you have to exclusively allow the installation of another app store. Um, but at the end of the day, now the consumer has more choice. It's not that Apple's App Store has gone away and what people are used to has completely gone away. But if you want to play Fortnite on your iPhone, now you have to download the Epic Game Store on the phone. So I think that would make more sense even from a consumer point of view, because if suddenly the services that you're so reliant on, and when I say consumers, it's not just the end user, it's also other businesses who are so reliant on this technology and reliant on this technology in the way that it works now with that interoperability, that if that had to break down and suddenly uh, one service cannot talk completely to another service, that's going to cause chaos to businesses. So let's see what they can learn from the EU model, essentially, and not maybe repeat the mistakes that they did with AT&T in this
And
case.
I completely agree with you, right? Because at the end of the day, being able to provide a service that could be used on a cross-platform or an interoperable perspective, it creates better synergies. Better
Mhm.
synergies improve economies of scale for
Yes.
both competitors and the consumer alike. So if I am a business and I use this product from this competitor, and I also use this product from another competitor, the fact that both technologies are able to speak to each other, it improves my economies of scale. Because I don't have to include a third party software for them to be able to speak.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that would definitely help. However, once again, how willing would Google be to do such a thing, especially when it's been very, very protective over its own search engine algorithms, and
Mhm.
rightly so at the end of the day, right? Because
It's their
it's a prime
IP.
asset if you have to
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about it. So I would be very protective over something like that. However, if they can foster that form of companionship where, listen, I want you to grow because you will help me grow because we will be interoperable. If they adopt that strategy, I think it's a win-win situation. So it's a win-win outcome for all parties involved, consumer included.
Absolutely. Zach, it's been a pleasure having you. I
Thank
think this
you.
was it's amazing to look at the legal aspect. It's not often that we do this necessarily from an SEO on how legal frameworks can impact the actual work we're doing. Do you have any closing remarks?
Well, yes, and I think, and this would be to pretty much, the immediate steps SEO professionals should be taking. I know we covered them before, but it's good to reiterate, right?
Mhm.
And as it currently stands, it's really important to diversify. Start experimenting, right? See what's out there, see what works. If it works, start building upon that at the side. It's really important to stay updated. Just keep track of any regulatory change, especially with the current court cases that Google is facing. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, Google is going to have a bit of a Blue Monday, and they're going to court in a Virginia court, and pretty much to defend their case once again on antitrust behavior. Focus on quality. So ultimately, even though there are many different technologies available, it's always important to pick quality. Um, Google does offer a quality product. We all know this, but I am certain that there is something as good on the market as Google's product. And lastly, use broad analytics, expand tracking to monitor performance across all platforms.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Zach. It's been a
Thank you
pleasure
for
having
having me.
you. And to the audience, we would appreciate if you like and subscribe to our channel. We'll definitely have more exciting podcasts coming along. And in the meantime, I wish you all an amazing day. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye bye.